Hey guys, tonight we're walking a path that millions of medieval women walked every single day. Before you settled into your bed tonight, you probably did something without even thinking about it. You turned on a tap, water came out, maybe you drank it, maybe you washed your hands, maybe you filled a kettle. It took you, 5 seconds. For a medieval woman, getting that same water was a 3-hour journey. Minimum. Every single day. For her entire life. Tonight, we're following that journey, step by step, mile by mile, from the moment she wakes up in the dark to the moment she finally sets those heavy buckets down. And by the end, you'll never look at your kitchen sink the same way again. Let's begin. You open your eyes to a grey-blue sliver of dawn over the fields outside Shrewsbury in the year 1287. The air is cold enough to nip the inside of your nose, and you can smell the faint bite of old ash drifting from dying coals inside nearby cottages. The village hasn't fully woken yet, just a few shutters creaking open, a sleepy goat braying half-heartedly, and the soft shuffle of someone stepping outside to toss slops to the pigs. But one figure is already moving with purpose. A woman wraps a wool shawl around herself, secures the frayed hem beneath her arm, and steps into the morning with a pair of empty wooden buckets knocking lightly against her knees. This is the path she'll walk today, and tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. It's muscle memory, obligation and inevitability wrapped into one daily pilgrimage. You're barely awake and already you're thinking there's no way you'd survive this routine. She doesn't have that luxury. You follow her onto the narrow dirt track just as the sun starts hinting at rising, a pale smear behind thick winter clouds. Her breath fogs in front of her, quick but steady, as she begins calculating the day's needs. Cooking water, washing water, soaking water, brewing water, water for the sheep, water for the chickens, water for the baby, water for rinsing the pot used to make yesterday's porridge. Medieval life isn't built on bread, it's built on buckets. You match her pace, feeling the cold seep through your shoes as frost crunches beneath your feet. She doesn't seem to notice. Her body has long since learned to ignore the discomfort of pre-dawn chores. Instead, her focus is fixed on the route ahead, a winding path toward the nearest dependable water source, which in this case happens to be a spring about 1.5 miles away. Not close enough to be convenient, not far enough to justify complaint, just the right distance to make each day's work feel like a blend of necessity and endurance training. And no, there's no tap inside her cottage. There's no pump with a crank handle. There's no indoor plumbing, no running water, no pipes hidden inside walls. If she wants water, she goes to it. No exceptions. The village around you slowly stirs. A few other women slip out of their homes, each carrying their own buckets. Some have wooden yokes across their shoulders, the buckets swaying like stubborn toddlers at either end. Others carry clay jugs, or even old iron pots repurposed for hauling whenever a proper bucket cracks. Everyone here knows the unspoken rules of morning water duty. Head down, keep moving, don't think too hard about how heavy those containers will feel on the way back. Even the teenagers on the path, girls just emerging into adulthood, already know this route by heart. Childhood ends right around the time you can lift a half-full bucket without collapsing like a beached fish. The first stretch of road slopes downward, turning your walk into a cautious dance between frost patches and uneven stones. The woman you're shadowing has perfect balance, learned from thousands of mornings exactly like this one. She steps around a patch of icy mud, pulls the shawl higher around her ears, and keeps going. You hear a light joke from the group ahead. Something about someone's husband snoring loud enough to scare off wolves. It gets a small ripple of sleepy laughter. Humour is one of the few luxuries the morning allows. But beneath that chatter lies a strict reality. Water is a tyrant. It dictates the schedule of every home in the village. Nothing happens without it. Not food preparation, not cleaning, not caring for animals, not brewing, not bathing, not tending to the sick, not extinguishing fires. You begin to realise that this one resource doesn't just support medieval life, it shapes it entirely. The woman beside you adjusts her grip on the empty bucket handles, her fingers already stiffening in the cold. She has a small mental ledger running in her head. Yesterday her household went through more water than usual because her husband returned from the fields covered in mud. The baby spilled half a pot near the hearth, and her sister stopped by to help grind oats, which meant extra washing. Today might require an additional trip depending on how quickly the water disappears, and it always disappears quickly. Once water reaches a medieval household, it's immediately put to work. You look around at the other women and notice the layers of clothing they wear. Thick wool cloaks, patched tunics, heavy skirts still damp from yesterday's snow. On most days, this walk doubles as the warm-up routine for the rest of existence. Water fetching isn't just a chore, it's cardio, strength training, and endurance all wrapped into one. Medieval gym memberships came free with birth. Ahead of you, the track widens slightly as it leaves the village behind and opens into a stretch of meadow that glitters faintly with frost. Now that the houses have fallen away, the field's silence presses around you, broken only by the soft thud of boots and the low conversation drifting between women. A crow calls from a tree somewhere off to the right, as if announcing that the human highway is officially open. The woman you're following doesn't look up. She keeps her eyes on the path, her pace steady, her breath rhythmic. This walk is as familiar as the layout of her own home. You watch her hands closely, the way she curls her fingers around the bucket handles, the way she shifts her grip every so often to warm her palms against her own sleeves. The walk out to the spring is the easy part, if such a word can be used at all. The return journey is where the real strain begins, when the weight of several gallons pulls your shoulders downward and each step threatens to slosh away precious water. But even now, empty-handed, this journey sets the tone for her day. If she returned late, the morning meal would be delayed. If she stumbled or slipped or the spring was crowded, everything in the household would grind to a halt. Water doesn't wait. Water doesn't forgive. Water doesn't negotiate. As the sun finally pushes itself over the horizon, a pale golden light stretches across the fields, sharpening the edges of the landscape. You can see the path ahead clearly now, the faint depression carved into the earth from centuries of identical footsteps. You get the sense that if you dug down through the dirt, you'd find layers of footprints belonging to generations of women long gone, each one walking the same road at the same hour for the same reason. You might expect frustration or resentment, but no. What you see in this woman is something closer to practicality mixed with a quiet resignation. This is her life. This is what keeps her family alive. Water carrying isn't heroism, it's habit. And once something becomes habit, the mind stops rebelling against it. You walk beside her as the spring finally comes into view. A shallow, rocky pool fed by a thin trickle of clear water. Several women are already gathered there, scooping, filling, waiting their turn. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, it's not sterile. But it's the only source they trust, and it's been dependable for longer than anyone can remember. Even so, medieval people did not take clean water for granted. A sudden rainstorm could muddy it. A dead animal upstream could spoil it. Cold weather could slow the trickle to a stubborn drip. She steps forward, waits her turn, kneels with practiced care, and lowers the bucket into the cold water. The surface ripples as it fills, the weight growing, the wood darkening. The moment the bucket is full, she lifts it with a small grunt, quiet enough to hide, loud enough for you to catch. You realise then, this is just the beginning. The return journey will be harder. The strain will be visible. The muscles in her shoulders will tighten. The path will seem steeper. The cold will cling harder once skin meets water-soaked wood. But she doesn't hesitate. She never does. This is the rhythm of medieval life, and the cadence begins every morning at the water's edge. The bucket steadies. Against her hip as she rises from the spring, water sloshing gently against the wooden sides. Her fingers tighten around the handle, adjusting to the immediate tug of the weight. You follow her as she steps away from the crowded bank, giving space to the next woman in line. There's no need for thanks, no choreographed politeness. Everyone here knows the unspoken system. Quick movements, no dawdling, and absolutely no dropping your bucket unless you're prepared to be roasted about it for the next 3 seasons. You watch the spring more closely now, because this stretch of the journey is all about understanding why this spot matters so much. Medieval water sources weren't chosen for convenience, they were chosen because they worked, or at least they worked well enough most of the time for the majority of the year, and when they didn't work, when the spring slowed to a trickle or froze or turned cloudy, everything in the village stalled. You take in the scene around you. This spring is nothing more than a shallow scoop carved into the earth, shored up by a few carefully placed stones to stop the bank from collapsing. But for this community, it's the beating heart. Without it, people go thirsty, animals suffer, cooking stops, brewing stops, cleaning stops. Even the local smith would struggle. Metal doesn't quench itself, after all. The water here is cold, fresh, and, by medieval standards, relatively clean. Not perfectly clean, of course. You've seen a dog splash through this very pool on your way down. But in 1287, relatively clean is king. The route between the village and the spring wasn't chosen at random either. It's the safest, driest, most stable path through the terrain. And it's not even close to being the shortest. A direct line from the cottages would slice through a marshy meadow, another through a patch of thorn bushes, another through a farmer's private field whose geese have the emotional stability of medieval war horses. So the women follow this carefully maintained track, a compromise between distance and survival. Every bend in the road exists because someone, at some point centuries earlier, learned the hard way that there was no better option. The woman ahead of you shifts the bucket again, testing the balance. It's only a partial fill because she and every other woman here knows the trick. Better to make more trips with a manageable load than one trip with a bucket so heavy it yanks your shoulder into early retirement. Water is dense. It weighs roughly a kilogram per litre, and her bucket holds at least 10. Add the bucket itself, and she's already carrying a weight approaching that of a small anvil. And that's only bucket number 1. She'll fill the second in a moment, after making sure the first settles without spilling half her work back into the mud. Local water sources weren't just mapped, they were understood intimately. Women knew which ones dried out in summer, which stayed icy cold even in late autumn, which ones tasted metallic after heavy rain, and which ones turned murky when the ground thawed. Water knowledge wasn't written down, it was inherited, passed from mother to daughter, with the same seriousness you'd expect from passing down a family recipe or the layout of a dangerous city alleyway. One wrong source could mean sickness, or wasted effort, or a very long walk ending in disappointment. Behind you, a younger girl kneels at the spring's edge, scooping lazily, the ripple of the water revealing her inexperience. Her mother grunts something sharp, probably a reminder not to disturb the bottom sediment unless she wants to ruin the whole morning's supply. The girl corrects herself quickly. Lesson learned. As the woman you're following lifts her second bucket, she pauses for a moment, her gaze flicking toward a narrow path that snakes deeper into the woods. It's overgrown, barely used, and leads to a stream that once served the village before the spring became the reliable favourite. That stream still exists, technically. It just isn't safe anymore. Flooding carved out new trenches, fallen branches dammed certain spots, and the water runs faster and muddier now than it did when her grandmother walked those same woods. Local water maps weren't just about placement, they were about survival updates. Which source is trustworthy? Which is unpredictable? Which is worth the risk? The woman turns back toward the main path, her buckets balanced but far from full. For her, and for every medieval household, this is only the start, the first haul, the baseline, the warm-up set before the real weight arrives. You fall into step beside her again, watching how instinctively she stabilises each bucket so the liquid inside doesn't slosh out in a mocking little wave. Some villages had access to wells instead of springs, and honestly, wells had their own dramatic personalities. Dug deep by hand, reinforced with wood or stone, and constantly monitored for contamination, wells required as much attention as a temperamental medieval landlord. If the rope frayed, someone had to replace it. If the bucket cracked, someone had to repair it. If the water level dropped, everyone started whispering about dry spells and divine punishment, and which unlucky household had angered a saint. In some places, water sources were communal property. In others, they belonged to a specific lord or monastery, and access involved paying fees or offering labour in exchange. The politics of water could turn sour faster than old ale. Entire communities might relocate when their water source failed. A village without water was a village on borrowed time. The woman half turns her head as more neighbours join the path, each falling into quiet procession. The road looks even longer now, stretching across the frost-bitten meadow, with the faint glow of sunrise making the horizon shimmer. You can almost see the shape of this settlement in your mind, clusters of cottages, barns, inns, vegetable gardens and animal pens, all organised around the one thing that mattered most: proximity to water by foot, by distance, by daily expectation. And that expectation, this endless walk, isn't random. Medieval people didn't settle far from water out of laziness or stubbornness. They settled where land was workable, where soil grew crops, where grazing fields opened, where the Lord permitted building, where forest provided timber. Sometimes everything lined up perfectly: flat land, good soil, clean water source nearby. Sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, water carrying filled the gap. The woman ahead slows slightly to let an older villager pass. Her shoulders tense instinctively. Heavy buckets don't react well to sudden shifts in momentum. You feel the muscles in your own arms tighten in sympathy, even though you're just watching. This walk is deliberate. A science of balance. Every step carefully measured, every sway accounted for. Medieval women didn't need gym classes because daily life was one. As the group makes its way along the path, the terrain tells its own story. You notice a worn patch where dozens of feet have compacted the ground, making it smoother than natural soil should ever be. Another spot is reinforced with planks, someone's clever solution to an area that kept turning into sticky mud after rain. In a more forested region, women might build stepping stones or cut small notches into tree roots to prevent slipping. Every environmental detail was observed, adjusted for and incorporated into the community's shared knowledge of water access. The woman pauses briefly at the top of a low rise, shifting her weight again. The buckets creak. Her breath comes in small white bursts. The path behind her is already dotted with other women making their slow ascent, the morning sun catching the rims of their wooden containers like halos of labour. You take it all in. The land, the people, the pace, the rhythm. This is medieval water logistics. Not glamorous, not poetic, but absolutely essential. And remarkably consistent. Day after day, year after year, season after season. The spring behind you fades from view. Ahead lies the return journey, which is only the first of many. The woman's buckets sway like pendulums of obligation, marking the tempo of her morning, and as she walks, steadily, silently, purposefully, you realise that this isn't just a path to water, it's a map of survival. The path bends gently to the left, and as the woman adjusts her stride to keep the bucket steady, you begin to understand just how much engineering and danger hides beneath the simple idea of a medieval well. Because while this village depends on a spring now, almost every settlement across Europe relied on a well at some point, dug by hand, maintained constantly, feared quietly. And even here, where the spring is reliable, the well in the village square still stands as a backup that could kill you if mishandled. You picture it as the woman walks, the square stone ring rising waist-high, the wooden frame arching over it, a rope coiled around a thick beam, the bucket hanging like a promise or a threat depending on the day. Wells were not rustic, charming set pieces. They were massive holes cut deep into unstable earth, with nothing but muscle, rope, and stubbornness. Digging one meant weeks, sometimes months, of men lowering themselves into darkness with shovels, hacking at clay, soil and rock, while standing in a pit that could collapse at any time. And let's be honest, medieval safety gear was optimism. Once a well reached water, the real problem started. Groundwater shifts, stones loosen, timbers rot, wells collapse inward or flood with foul-smelling runoff. contamination is constant. Dead animals, decaying roots, tannins, mud, even the occasional medieval prank, because apparently teenagers have always been teenagers. And when a well turned foul, people didn't get sick gently. Waterborne illness in the 13th century was like picking the hard mode option in a video game you didn't know you were playing. The woman you're shadowing glances toward the direction of the village square, not because she plans to use the well this morning, but because wells were every family's insurance policy. When the spring ran low or froze or flooded, the entire community shifted to the well like a herd adjusting waterholes in the dry season. But that shift always came with anxiety. A well that hadn't been used in months might have rotting leaves at the bottom, or stagnant layers. The rope might fray without warning, the bucket might crack, and because medieval people feared the unseen, bad air, curses, divine displeasure, any odd smell could start rumours faster than you can say, "My cousin's neighbour swears the water turned black." You imagine the process of maintaining it. Men hauling up debris with long iron hooks, children running buckets back and forth, someone lowering a lantern and squinting into the shadows, checking for signs of collapse. Every few years the whole village might pool their labour to reinforce the walls with new stones or timber rings. If the well was shallow, it filled quickly but dried fast. If it was deep, the water stayed cool and steady, but raising it required strength and time. There's a reason medieval arms got the reputation for being sturdy. They spent their lives moving heavy things with zero ergonomic accommodations. The woman adjusts her grip again, fingers flexing around the wooden handles. Wells might be complex, dangerous, unpredictable infrastructure projects, but springs and streams weren't exactly perfect either. If the spring froze, she might have to hack through ice with a dull blade. If it overflowed, the water turned brown and gritty. If a neighbour upstream washed wool or hides in it, the whole morning. Supply smelled like wet sheep. In every direction, her water sources were either risky or exhausting, and yet not having water was simply not an option. Her buckets sway as she walks, and you can almost hear the unspoken gratitude under her breath that today at least, she doesn't have to lean over the well-stone rim and lower a rope into the dark. That particular task came with its own choreography. Lower the bucket slowly, too fast and it tips, trapping air. Let it fill. Feel the rope go slack, then pull upward hand over hand, weight increasing until your knuckles burn. One wrong movement and the bucket might collide with the stone wall, cracking or spilling its contents halfway up. And if you ever dropped it completely, congratulations, you have officially become the village embarrassment until someone fishes it out with a hook or sends down an unlucky volunteer. Wells were community lifelines, but they were also community liabilities. Anything could fall in. Tools, cloth scraps, animals, even the occasional thief thinking he could hide in the wrong hole, and retrieving things required dangerous improvisation. It wasn't uncommon for someone small, often a young boy or thin man, to be lowered by rope into the shaft to inspect damage or clear blockages. If that rope snapped, you didn't get a rescue operation. You got a funeral. Luckily for you, and the woman walking ahead, the spring is working just fine this morning. Still, the presence of the well shapes everything. It defines the centre of the village. It marks the division of space. Homes nearby, barns surrounding, workshops facing the square. It dictates how people gather, gossip, argue, and negotiate. In winter, steam rises from the mouths of the women waiting in line. In summer, children splash water onto the stones until they're chased off with stern scolding. And always, the clatter of the bucket, the creak of the rope, the splash of water hitting wood. The woman's pace is steady but not hurried. She's pacing herself deliberately. One false step can send water sloshing upward like a tiny rebellious wave, and medieval families hated waste with a passion modern people reserve for bad Wi-Fi. Every drop carried here cost time, energy, and physical wear. Women didn't walk with buckets, they walked with liquid gold. As she approaches a narrow twist in the road, she tilts her head and listens. No one speaks about wells right now, the spring is enough today. But the topic hovers like a background hum in every medieval settlement. When water ran low, tensions boiled fast. Villagers argued over turn order, accused neighbours of taking too much, or whispered about curses. Wells were such powerful symbols of survival that they appeared in romances, religious stories, legal disputes, and even local superstitions. Some believed spirits lived inside them. Others dropped small offerings, coins, ribbons, herbs, hoping for luck or protection. You think of the irony. Modern. People decorate wells as garden ornaments. Medieval people treated wells with wary respect, like unpredictable relatives who might help you or ruin you at any moment. The woman continues onward, and you watch the way she occasionally glances at the horizon as if measuring something. Maybe she's calculating whether she has time for an extra trip before noon. Maybe she's thinking of visiting her sister. Maybe she's thinking of the well repairs her husband promised to help with last year and absolutely did not. In medieval households, the well wasn't just a structure. It was a stress point, a responsibility, a budget problem, a symbol of status. If your well was clean and maintained, you were competent. If it wasn't, everyone whispered. As the woman crests another rise, bucket steady against her hips, you understand something quietly brutal. Every drop of water she fetches sits atop centuries of dangerous labour carved into earth and stone. Wells were not miracles, they were scars, deep wounds in the land maintained by constant human effort. And while the spring makes her job marginally easier today, the well still stands back in the village as its silent, lurking reminder that water is a resource you fight for. Ahead of you, the path evens out. The sun brightens, and the village waits, still half asleep, still dependent on this single woman's careful steps. The buckets sway, the morning stretches, and the return journey has only just begun. The village roofs come back into view as the woman readjusts her grip, and you can tell she's already calculating how quickly this first haul will disappear. Because here's the part modern people underestimate every single time. Medieval households needed a shocking amount of water just to get through an ordinary day. Not for showers, not for dishwashers, not for leafy houseplants that you forget to water until they faint dramatically. No, just the bare basics of staying alive at through gallons with ruthless efficiency. You watch her bucket sway, and you start mentally tallying the invisible ledger she's been managing since dawn. Breakfast alone demands several litres, oats to soak, grains to rinse, pots to scrub, hands to wash, and maybe a bit left over to warm over the fire for the baby. Water for the animals comes next. Sheep need it. Chickens need it. The family cow can drink more in a day than a medieval household uses in everything else combined. But here's the twist. She can't spare much for the animals until the family's own needs are met, because priority in medieval life is brutally practical. If the people don't cook, clean and hydrate first, nothing else functions. As you follow her down the path, she leans forward slightly to counterbalance the buckets. The weight is pulling her shoulders down, carving invisible grooves along her collarbones where the strain hits hardest. You can almost hear her inner monologue. How much she has, how much she needs, how much she'll have to bring later. Because medieval water demand doesn't come as one big lump. It comes in a steady parade of tiny requirements, each one essential, each one non-negotiable. Take cooking. Most meals start with some form of grain: barley, rye, oats, wheat if the family's lucky. Every grain must be rinsed, cooked, stirred. Then the pot must be rinsed again because charred porridge is basically medieval superglue. Add vegetables, they need washing too unless you enjoy the crunchy texture of dirt and worms at breakfast. Want bread today? Dough demands water. Flour sticks to everything. The bowl needs rinsing, wiped down, rinsed again. By the time breakfast ends, a medieval woman has already blown through a decent portion of what she carried. And that's only the first act. Laundry day? Forget it. Laundry is a water apocalypse. Entire rivers tremble when laundry day arrives. Clothes were boiled, soaked, scrubbed, beaten, rinsed. Rinsed again, then rinsed again because medieval detergents were less pleasant lavender scent and more mystery lye that will absolutely peel your hands. Fabric was thick, dirt was stubborn, water vanished by the bucketful. Then there's bathing, not daily, not even weekly for many families. But when it did happen, it was a production requiring gallons, heated over a fire, carried half-boiled into a wooden tub that leaked if you looked at it wrong. You needed water to clean the tub afterward too, because bathing didn't magically remove the grime, it just relocated it. And let's not skip medieval cleaning. Floors weren't smooth tile, they were packed dirt sprinkled with straw. Spills needed dousing, sticky residue needed scrubbing. Grease from cooking fires made soot cling to everything. If you didn't rinse your wooden bowls quickly enough, they started smelling like a medieval armpit. Water kept household bacteria at bay. Not perfectly, but enough that people didn't all drop dead instantly. You pass a wooden fence, the frost cracking as sunlight warms it. The woman ahead shifts her shoulders again, and you notice the way she walks is almost metronomic. Every step is measured. Smooth heel, careful toe, minimal sway. Because spilling even a cup of water now means another trip later, and that's the hidden cost of medieval water. Every splash is time. The livestock enclosure lies just ahead. A chicken darts across the path, offended that anyone would dare move through its personal kingdom. A goat bleats disapprovingly. The woman ignores both, her focus pinned on the buckets as she slows her approach. She sets them down gently, letting the water settle before pouring measured amounts into a wooden trough. Not too much. Animals can drink later when more water arrives. For now, she preserves what's needed inside the cottage. And speaking of cottages, those tiny structures ate water faster than you'd expect. There's hearth ash to mix into cleaning paste. There's clay to soften for sealing cracks. There's wool to rinse after spinning, leather to soak, tools to clean, herbs to steep, dishes to wash, wounds to rinse, dyes to mix, ale to brew, babies to wipe down. It's endless. The woman lifts the buckets again, lighter now but still heavy, and heads toward the doorway of her home. She carefully pours a portion into a ceramic jug inside, then another into a large iron pot hanging over the fire. She splashes a bit onto a cloth to wipe the table. She dips her hands in to wash them before preparing food. It's almost like watching a magician produce endless tasks from a single resource, except instead of rabbits and scarves, it's domestic survival. You hear a short laugh from a neighbour passing by with her own buckets. Something about her husband spilling water yesterday and nearly costing her an entire afternoon. No one laughs harder than women who agree on how annoying water can be. This is where the numbers really click into place. Medieval historians estimate daily water consumption for an average household could easily reach 40 to 60 litres. That's 10-15 gallons, minimum, and that's without any luxuries. Add in brewing or laundry or winter mud, and the number climbs into ranges that modern people associate with gardening or car washing, not basic survival. The woman you're shadowing sets one bucket aside and sighs so softly you almost miss it. She's measuring her remaining supply with practiced eyes. She needs enough to prepare the mid-morning meal, enough to start soaking grains for tonight, enough to rinse tools, enough to hydrate the cow so milk yields don't drop, enough to keep the house from smelling like a medieval tavern with a cleanliness crisis. And then, once she's stretched this limited supply as far as humanly possible, she'll walk back to the spring and do it all again. Not once, not twice. 3, 4, maybe 5 times today, depending on season, weather, and household chaos. You watch her kneel beside the hearth, using the last droplets in the bucket to wipe her hands, and you realise something profound. The daily demand isn't just physical, it's logistical, it's strategic. It's a constant mental calculation, a water budget with no room for error. In medieval life, water wasn't a convenience. It was the axis around which every hour turned, and the moment her arms stop aching, it's time to head back out. She straightens slowly, shaking out her hands as though trying to wake up each finger one by one. The buckets rest near the doorway, empty now, but still carrying the ghost weight of the morning's first haul. You'd think she'd get a moment to breathe, maybe stretch her back, maybe enjoy the warmth of the fire. But no, medieval life doesn't operate on the luxury of breaks, especially not for women. Before the steam from her breath has even faded, she's already bracing herself for the next trip, and as she picks up, the buckets again, this time lighter but still pressing awkwardly into her palms, you begin to see the truth. This chore wasn't hers by choice, it was hers by gender. Every single step of this water-fetching ritual is shaped by the unspoken rules of medieval society, rules enforced not by written law but by expectation, habit, and a culture built around strict divisions of labour. The moment she steps outside again, shawl wrapped tight, you see the roles unfolding around her like invisible signage. A boy races past carrying an armful of firewood, an exception, because firewood is one of the few tasks considered acceptable for men and older boys. A girl of maybe 9 trudges along behind her mother, dragging a tiny bucket half filled with water like she's preparing for the day. Her arms are strong enough to carry the real thing. Men are heading to the fields, tools slung over their shoulders, already talking about ploughing schedules. None of them turn toward the spring, not one. It's not because men were unwilling to carry water. It's because the entire structure of medieval life sorted tasks into rigid categories: outside labour for men, household labour for women, and water carrying, despite involving miles walked, steep hills, freezing temperatures, and weights that could wrench a shoulder out of alignment, was somehow classified as domestic. You watch her fall into line with a small cluster of women heading back toward the spring. They're not chatting yet. The morning is still young, and their minds are already tracking the dozens of tasks waiting at home. But there's a shared rhythm here, an unspoken camaraderie. Every one of them woke before dawn. Every one of them has a household relying on them. Every one of them has walked this path so often that they could probably follow it blindfolded. You notice the way the girl behind her mimics her stride, short steps, even pacing, bucket held slightly off-centre to reduce sway. Childhood apprenticeship starts early. Since girls are expected to join the water-carrying workforce as soon as they're physically capable, the training happens quietly, seamlessly, woven into morning routines. A girl might start with tiny buckets, then medium buckets, then full-size ones by the time she reaches her teens. It's not ceremonial, it's necessity. Meanwhile, boys the same age are groomed for fieldwork, animal care, and heavy crafts. Their arms may be stronger by adulthood, but their schedules are tied to outdoor labour from dawn to dusk. If a man brought water, the household would fall behind in tasks that absolutely required male labour: ploughing fields, repairing fences, herding large animals, chopping large timber. The survival of the family depended on everyone doing the tasks the culture designated for them. And since women controlled the domestic world, water fell firmly and permanently into their jurisdiction. The woman you follow adjusts the shawl around her shoulders as the group reaches the edge of the village where the path narrows into the familiar frost-lined track. She doesn't look bothered. This is just what she does. What her mother did. What her grandmother did. What every woman in this lineage has done for centuries. There's a certain pride in that continuity, even if the task itself is punishing. Still, gender norms were not just practical, they were symbolic. Water represented nourishment, cleanliness, life itself. In medieval symbolism and Christian imagery, water was tied to purity, domestic virtue, and the home sphere, all traits assigned to women. Carrying water wasn't just a task, it was an expectation laden with moral weight. A woman who carried water diligently was seen as hard-working, virtuous, responsible. One who neglected it, lazy, careless, even suspicious. Entire reputations hinged on the seemingly simple act of walking to the spring and back. As you walk behind her, you spot a small cottage where a very elderly woman sits on a low stool, hands wrapped around a mug of warm broth. Her daughter passes her on the path, dipping her head respectfully. Even when elderly women no longer carried water, they still participated by managing, advising, and directing others. Domestic responsibility didn't retire, it transferred. You pass the smithy next. The blacksmith is already pounding away at a blade, sparks flying in tiny arcs that disappear into the cold morning air. His apprentice pumps the bellows. The rhythmic clangs echo across the village. It's loud, forceful, unmistakably male labour. This is the sort of work that medieval society glorified. Visible strength, heavy tools, loud noise. Meanwhile, water carrying, quiet, exhausting, repetitive, was invisible, unless it stopped. Then suddenly everyone noticed. The woman lifts her chin slightly as the breeze shifts, blowing icy air across her cheeks. You can almost feel the sting. Despite the cold, she doesn't hesitate. There's no alternative, no backup plan, no option to delegate. Even on the worst days, even while sick, pregnant, injured, or exhausted, women fetched water or ensured someone did in their place. It was physical labour wrapped in emotional and social obligation. A light joke emerges from the group ahead. Something about a husband who tried to carry water once and spilled half the bucket before even clearing the cottage door. The laughter that follows is familiar, affectionate, tinged with exasperation. Men untutored in household tasks were adorable in theory and disastrous in practice. Women worked around this for centuries. But beneath the humour lies a truth medieval women lived with every day. The domestic sphere was theirs, but it was also a trap. They were respected for fulfilling their role, but it was a role that demanded constant physical labour, with no recognition from anyone outside their own home. No chronicler wrote, "Lady Agnes carried 40 litres today with remarkable efficiency." No poet serenaded the beauty of hauling buckets through mud. No preacher praised the endurance of women who walked miles at dawn while men still slept. Water carrying shaped a woman's posture, her strength, her joints, her pace of life. It strained her back, thickened her arms, toughened her hands, and yet it was dismissed as natural, normal, expected. The very definition of women's work. As the woman makes her way further down the path, a man passes on horseback, tipping his head toward her politely. He's travelling to a nearby market town, cloak flapping behind him. He doesn't slow down. The buckets barely register in his world. He doesn't need to. His duties lie elsewhere. The society around him guarantees he won't be expected to fill a single bucket unless circumstances are dire. You watch him gallop away, and you can't help noting the irony. Even the horse probably drinks more water per day than the entire family he just rode past. And yet its needs will be met by women hauling water, not by the man riding it. The woman continues, and you feel the gravity of this system settling deeper. Gender roles weren't merely suggested, they were the architecture of medieval life, and water carrying sat at the very foundation of the domestic world. By the time the spring comes into view again, the path dotted with familiar footprints, the truth feels unmistakable. She doesn't carry water because she's physically suited to it. She carries water because the entire society depends on her doing it, and this is only her second trip. The woman returns to the spring with the same steady rhythm you've now come to recognise, a kind of practiced endurance that makes the whole process look deceptively simple. But now that you're watching more closely, you begin noticing something you didn't before. Every woman here carries water in a slightly different way. Not in a symbolic, poetic way, in a literal, practical, survival-based way, determined by the container in her hands. And suddenly the landscape around the spring looks less like a line of people and more like a catalogue of medieval engineering. Wooden pails, clay jugs, leather bags, iron pots, even a few woven baskets lined with pitch. It hits you then. This world didn't just depend on water. It depended on the technology of moving it. The woman you follow sets her empty buckets down and wipes her palms on her skirt. Her buckets are wooden, bound with iron hoops that keep the staves tight. They're sturdy, but heavy. Even empty, each bucket weighs more than a modern grocery bag. When full, they become small, portable anchors, dragging at her shoulders like disgruntled toddlers. Around her, other women use tools matched to their circumstances. Poorer households might use rough wooden tubs carved from a single log, more like troughs with handles than actual buckets. Wealthier women might carry ceramic jugs glazed in warm browns or pale greens, their curved handles designed to rest comfortably against the forearm. These look elegant until you remember they shatter if bumped too hard or set down on a crooked stone. And then there are the leather water bags, soft, pliable, unpredictable. They're great for long-distance travel because they don't leak when sealed properly, but they flop and sway like living creatures when carried. One woman struggles with hers now, trying to coax its shape into the spring without letting it fold in on itself like a collapsing lung. You watch all this as the woman you're shadowing dips her first bucket into the water, the surface trembling as wood meets stream. She lowers it carefully, angled just right so bubbles escape and don't force the bucket to bob up crooked. This is a skill. A tiny, specific, surprisingly difficult skill. Lower too quickly, and the bucket traps air and tilts sideways. Lower too slowly, and it fills unevenly. Tilt a fraction too far, and it scoops more mud than water. As she lifts it again, droplets run down the sides, glistening against the darkening wood. The bucket looks simple, almost crude, but it's the product of an entire craft. Cooperage, barrel and bucket making, was one of the most respected trades in medieval towns. A well-made bucket could last years, even decades, with regular repairs. A badly made one could split in a week, wasting hours of labour and leaving a family scrambling for help. The second bucket goes down more smoothly. She's done this thousands of times. If medieval people had resumes, hers would list expert water collection, 20+ years experience, great with mud. She lifts the bucket again, steadying her arms, then steps aside to make room for the next woman. Once you start really paying attention to the technology of carrying water, the entire scene shifts. It's not just about weight, though the weight is brutal. It's about ergonomics, medieval style. Some women use shoulder yokes, wide wooden bars that rest across the shoulders, with a bucket hanging from each end on ropes. The design spreads the load across the back instead of the arms. Smart, efficient, still physically punishing. A yoke digs into the collarbone, rubs the skin raw, and forces the wearer into a stiff, upright posture. One wrong shift, and you're off balance. A younger woman carries water in ceramic jugs that nestle into the crook of her elbows, their rounded sides pressed firmly against her ribs. This method might look graceful, but it restricts arm movement so much that each step is a stiff shuffle. If she slips, the jug breaks, and that's a half week's wages gone in a heartbeat. One woman farther down uses a pair of iron pots, likely borrowed from her kitchen, because either her buckets broke or someone else in the household needed them. Iron pots were heavy when empty. Full of water, they're about as manageable as carrying 2 angry boulders with handles. Even barrels, yes, actual small barrels, were sometimes used by wealthier households with carts or pack animals. But using a horse or ox for water fetching was rare and occasionally scandalous. Animals ate too much. They had more important tasks. Bringing them to a spring meant churned mud, danger to smaller women, and the unspoken accusation that you weren't doing your fair share of domestic labour. So the woman you follow does what nearly all medieval women did. She uses what she has, repairs what she can, and adapts constantly. As she begins the return walk, you notice a small detail that feels almost tender. She keeps her elbows tucked close to her sides, absorbing some of the sway of the buckets. This trick reduces sloshing and prevents the handles from biting too deeply into her fingers. It's a tiny adjustment, but it's the difference between a steady walk and a wrist injury, and injuries mattered. A single strained hand could cripple an entire household's productivity. No water meant no cooking, no cleaning, no livestock care, no brewing, no textile work. Tasks piled up quickly. You cross a rocky section of the path and she slows instinctively. This is slosh territory. A misstep here means a cold shower of wasted effort and a long, humiliating trudge back to refill. Her steps become deliberate, the kind of careful precision you'd expect from someone carrying nitroglycerin, not pond-fed drinking water. As you walk, you start noticing wear patterns on everyone's containers. Wooden buckets show dark rings where water seeps into the seams. Jugs are chipped at the base from being set down on uneven ground. Leather bags bulge at strange angles from repeated dampening and drying. Each vessel tells its own story of compromise, repair, and daily strain. Every woman here has at least one scar on her knuckles from a bucket handle snapping back. Splinters embedded in palms, bruises from yoke bars, stiffness in fingers from winter cold. Medieval water fetching wasn't picturesque. It was an athletic event, except no one cheered, no one rested, and no one handed out medals. The woman pauses briefly near a tree stump and adjusts her grip again. The handles of her buckets dig into the creases of her fingers, and she rotates her wrists to keep the circulation flowing. You realise how much physical technique goes into this. She isn't just carrying heavy objects, she's managing a shifting fluid weight that actively resists her with every movement. It's not like carrying firewood or grain. Water moves, it sloshes, surges, rebounds. A single misstep can send it surging upward like a rebellious ghost trying to escape. And the bucket, pushed by the shifting mass inside, yanks her off balance with all the grace of a medieval prankster. Still she continues, step by step, mile by mile, her arms trembling faintly from the strain yet never faltering. And here's the strange truth you start to notice. The bucket itself shapes her body. The muscles along her. Forearms are strong. Her shoulders are broad and durable. Her back curves slightly forward, not from weakness but from decades of leaning into the load. Her steps are sure, her centre of gravity low. She carries herself with the grounded confidence of someone who could probably deadlift you without breaking eye contact. As the cottage roofs come back into view, you realise something almost comical. Every medieval household depended on the structural integrity of their buckets, the same way modern households depend on Wi-Fi. If it broke, everyone's day went downhill fast. The woman reaches her doorway again, sets the buckets down with a grunt, shakes out her hands, and rolls her shoulders. The weight leaves her arms, but only temporarily. She stretches her fingers, massages her palms, and glances toward the spring again. Because after she distributes this water, she's going back. Not because she wants to, but because the vessels she carries, wood, clay, leather, iron, only hold so much, and her day has barely begun. The cottage door closes softly behind her as she sets down the buckets and listens to the water settle, the liquid inside sloshing against the wooden sides with a hollow, unsettled sound. There's a moment, just a breath, where she stands still, palms open, fingers trembling slightly from the cold and the strain. Then she kneels, scoops a portion into a clay bowl, and examines it like someone judging the mood of a very temperamental acquaintance. Because here's the truth medieval people lived with every single day. Water could betray you. It might look clear now, but clarity isn't purity, not in the 13th century, not when springs and streams double as playgrounds for animals, drainage for fields, and occasional resting places for things that really shouldn't be floating there. You've probably heard the stereotype that medieval water was always filthy, always dangerous, always avoided. That's only half true. People did drink water, daily, constantly, but only after using their senses like finely tuned scientific instruments. The woman you follow tilts the bowl, watching for sediment. Tiny flecks drift slowly downward, settling at the bottom like silt stirred in a snow globe. Not ideal, but manageable. Sediment can be avoided, just don't drink the last swallow. Medieval survival tip number 1. She sniffs the water next. Smell mattered. A hint of algae? Fine. A suspicious sulphur tang? Not fine. A faint whiff of wet dog? Annoying but drinkable. A rotten egg smell? Only if you're interested in a spectacular gastrointestinal adventure you definitely won't survive. Taste comes last. She dips her thumb into the bowl and touches it to her lip. Barely. Even this tiny sample tells her enough. The spring is running clean today. The flavour is cold, mineral-rich, with no metallic afterbite, no barnyard tang, no bitterness that suggests runoff from upstream. This is good water. Lucky morning. You watch her. Move with practised ease, pouring some into a pot, some into a jug, some into a small wooden cup for the toddler wailing from the corner of the room. The entire time she's listening, really listening, to every sound the water makes. The slosh, the pour, the drip. Because any odd change means trouble. Too much foam on the surface, something organic is decomposing upstream, a green tint, algae bloom, a greasy film, someone washed wool or hides too close to the spring. The medieval world is full of clues, and water reveals all of them if you know what to look for. When she steps back outside for her next trip, the cold air hits your cheeks again. and you notice the other women are doing the same sensory rituals, lifting water to the light, sniffing cautiously, swirling it in bowls. Nothing formal, nothing ceremonial, just survival. And this brings you to one of the biggest challenges medieval women faced. Contamination risks were constant. Even clean sources came with hazards. Animals wandered freely. Cows waded into streams. Geese turned springs into their personal bathtubs. Dogs drank upstream. Pigs splashed downstream. And medieval sanitation, well, let's just say it wasn't winning any awards. Rainstorms carried manure into rivers. Snowmelt washed debris into springs. A single dead rabbit upstream could ruin an entire morning's supply. And then there were human hazards. Children throwing things into wells. Teenagers rinsing chamber pots too close to water sources. Poorly built latrines leaking during spring thaws. Medieval people weren't clueless. They understood contamination almost instinctively. But understanding doesn't magically make animals stay tidy, or children stop being agents of chaos. As the woman heads back down the path, she joins a cluster of neighbours all muttering their morning water reports. Spring's running clear today. Taste is better than yesterday. Heard the upper meadow flooded last night. Avoid the far edge. My cousin saw something floating in the stream near the old elm. What kind of something? Didn't want to get close enough to check. The shudder that moves through the group tells you everything you need to know. Medieval water quality was a gamble. But it was a gamble women were forced to evaluate daily, using senses modern people have allowed to soften. Your taste buds today are pampered. Hers are sharpened tools. Your nose detects perfume. Hers detects bacterial nightmares. As she gets closer to the spring again, she shifts her attention to something else entirely. Filtration. Not modern filtration. No charcoal cartridges, no fancy pumps, no paper filters. Just simple, clever, centuries-old techniques women used to turn probably fine water into good enough. Some households strained water through linen cloth, thin, worn pieces that caught sediment and bugs. Others let water sit in tall jugs so impurities sank overnight. Assist. Few dropped heated stones into the water to purify it by boiling. Inefficient, but sometimes useful. If water tasted metallic, people mixed it with ale. If it tasted bitter, they flavoured it with herbs. And then there was the trick of pouring water repeatedly from one bucket to another to expose it to air and improve its flavour. A tiny medieval aeration hack, used long before anyone understood oxygenation, but trusted because women could taste the difference. You watch her approach the spring again, and immediately notice something's off. The water surface is rippling, not from wind. There's barely a breeze. The dog has decided this is the perfect moment to wade in, splashing with the unrestrained joy of a creature who does not understand the consequences of its actions. Two women groan. One mutters something about sausage making. The dog shakes itself vigorously on the bank, spraying mud on the skirts of three unlucky bystanders. The woman you follow kneels at a different angle, aiming for a section of the spring the dog hasn't disturbed. Her eyes narrow with concentration. She dips the bucket carefully, angling it so the first scoop doesn't pick up floating fur or churned up silt. This is a delicate art. 1 inch too far, and she'll end up with muddy broth unfit for drinking. Finally, she lifts the bucket, checks the clarity, and nods. Clean enough. But enough here is doing a lot of work. Medieval people weren't careless. They were realistic. Perfection didn't exist. Purity wasn't the goal. Safety was. And safety meant using every tool available. Eyes, nose, taste, instinct, shortcuts passed down through generations. As she starts the return walk, you notice how lightly she steps around a puddle. The water inside the buckets reacts immediately, sloshing up the sides. But she steadies it. Barely a ripple leaves the rim. She's protecting every drop, not just from spilling, but from contamination. One splash of mud ruins everything. You look around, realizing the whole path is full of hidden dangers. Muddy depressions, animal tracks, dead leaves, rotting vegetation, frozen patches. All of them can foul water if a bucket swings the wrong way. Every step is controlled. Every shift of weight is rehearsed. Women didn't just carry water, they guarded it. because clean water was the difference between a smooth day and a disaster, between health and sickness, between chores flowing or falling apart. And as she moves steadily toward the village, buckets creaking, arms taut, breath clouding the air, you understand something profound. She isn't just transporting water, she's transporting survival. By the time she reaches the cottage again, the sky has shifted from pale grey to a weak, wintry blue, the kind that promises daylight but absolutely not warmth. She pours out the second haul of water, wipes her hands on her apron, and glances toward the horizon with the grim resignation of someone who knows the weather is about to turn. You can feel it too. A tightening in the air, a heaviness in the clouds, a whisper of wind that carries the unmistakable scent of incoming trouble. Because here's the part of the story people forget. Medieval women didn't just carry water, they carried water through weather, through seasons designed specifically to break the human spirit, through drought, mud, storms, snow, ice, wind, and temperatures that made metal tools sting like they'd been dipped in fire, and no matter what the sky decided to throw at them, the water still had to come home. She steps outside again, bucket handles hooking over her stiff fingers, and the change in the air is immediate. A thin sheet of frost glitters on the path. The wind whistles low, slipping through the branches with a knife-edged chill. She pulls her shawl tighter around her neck, not for comfort, but for survival. A medieval woman could work through hunger. She could work through exhaustion. But cold was an enemy that could kill her faster than any wolf. She begins the third trip of the day. The path is harder now. Yesterday's mud has frozen into ridges and bumps like the surface of a badly baked loaf. Each step feels like walking across pottery shards. Behind her, a younger girl slips, catches herself, and mutters under her breath in a tone that absolutely translates across centuries. They all keep moving. No one stops. Weather doesn't give out snow days. Water doesn't wait for spring. As you round the first bend, the wind picks up. It tugs at her skirts, flaps her shawl, and pushes cold straight through the weave of her clothing until it hits bone. Winter hauling is a test of willpower. Your body wants warmth. Your skin wants relief. Your fingers want to stop. But the buckets demand movement. And a medieval household without water is a disaster waiting to happen. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever carried anything heavy outdoors in freezing weather? How long until your hands ache? Until your grip weakens? Until your muscles cramp? Now imagine doing it in a world where gloves are rudimentary, synthetic fabrics don't exist, boots leak, and your only heated break room is a fire that barely keeps your toes alive. That's medieval waterwork in winter. The woman you follow keeps going, her breath puffing out in fast little clouds. The path is more treacherous now than it was an hour ago. Frost is settling on stones. Grasses are crisp and brittle. The earth underneath is stiff, uneven, unpredictable. Every step could end in a twisted ankle, which would end in disaster, because if she can't walk, she can't get water, and if she can't get water, the entire household grinds to a halt. And winter brings other challenges too. The spring itself changes. Frozen streams skim over with thin sheets of glass-like ice that crack ominously when disturbed. Springs slow to a trickle as cold contracts the earth around them. Water tastes sharper, more metallic, tinged with minerals that weren't noticeable in warmer months. Sometimes she has to break ice just to reach the liquid underneath. Sometimes she has to wait for others to break it. Sometimes they all work together, smashing through layers with sticks, stones, or the blunt ends of tools, their breaths pluming into the frigid morning air like smoke from small furnaces. When rain comes instead of snow, it doesn't arrive politely. Medieval rain was a full-body experience, relentless, icy, penetrating. Clothing gets soaked. The wind cuts through wet wool like a blade. Buckets get slippery, paths turn to sludge. Water sources overflow and become murky, churning with silt and debris. Some springs become unusable entirely during storms, forcing women to walk farther to another source. You imagine the woman in summer now. The fatigue is different, but no less punishing. The heat beats down, turning the walk into a sweaty, dizzying ordeal. Water evaporates, springs shrink, streams run shallow and warm, algae forms, bugs gather. Everyone is thirstier, animals included, doubling the demand. And because summer is the harvest season, men need water in the fields too, meaning more trips, more urgency, more miles walked. Autumn brings mud, endless, soul-crushing mud that sticks to shoes, fills ruts in the road, and doubles the weight of every step. Medieval mud doesn't behave. It clings like guilt. It grabs your feet like it's trying to pull you underground. It splashes with surprising accuracy directly into your buckets if you don't hold them at precisely the right angle. Spring is no kinder. Snowmelt floods paths. Dead vegetation from winter decays, filling streams with dark, sludgy backwash. The thawed ground becomes a swamp. Flooded meadows reroute familiar trails, forcing women to navigate detours that can add an extra half-mile each way. And through every season, one thing stays constant. She still has to walk. Your woman reaches the spring again. Her cheeks burn bright red from cold. Frost clings to her lashes. Her breath comes shorter now. 2 other women stand near the edge, using sticks to break ice that has formed since the morning's first trip. It's thin, but stubborn, forming new plates almost as fast as they shatter the old ones. The water underneath is frigid, colder than anything modern taps produce unless you live inside a glacier. When she dips her bucket, the shock of the temperature jolts through her hands like lightning. She lowers it slowly, watching shards of cracked ice drift aside. This is winter water collection at its most brutal. Fingers stiffening, sleeves dampening, joints aching, every motion a small battle against nature itself. She lifts the bucket again. The cold makes the wood creak louder. You realise she'll be relying on her own body heat to keep her fingers workable on the walk back. Medieval people understood cold intimately, not as an inconvenience, but as an adversary with teeth. And if you thought cold was bad, wait until you realise what happens next. Freezing water, plus winter wind. Medieval hand torture. Water splashes up over the rim, hitting her knuckles. It freezes almost instantly, coating her skin in a thin film of ice. She wipes it against her skirt. It freezes again. She keeps walking. Then comes snow. If snow starts falling now, and it just might, her buckets become miniature traps. Snowflakes melt on contact with the warmer water surface, adding to the load, cooling it further, and creating a slushy layer that increases spill risk. Too much snow and the bucket contents become useless for drinking or cooking. Ice water is dangerous. Slush is worse. It melts slowly near the hearth, wasting precious time and firewood. She turns back toward the village, and the trek begins again. A gust of wind hits. Her skirts snap against her legs. The bucket handles bite into her palms. The water inside wobbles angrily. She adjusts her stance and keeps moving. No drama, no complaining, just survival. This is what medieval women endured every day of winter, every day of rain, every day of heat. No matter the climate, no matter the discomfort, no matter the danger. And in bad weather, each trip that normally took 30 minutes could stretch into an hour or more. A 3-trip morning could become a 6-hour ordeal. You watch as she approaches the final ridge before the village. The wind dies briefly. The sun slips behind a cloud. The world grows still. And then, you hear it. A faint cracking sound behind her. Another woman slips on the icy path, landing hard on her hip. Her bucket spills. Water fans across the ground, freezing instantly into a thin, treacherous layer of ice. Every woman on the path pauses, not in judgment, but in solidarity. They know exactly how devastating that is. It's not funny. It's not minor. It's time lost. Energy lost. A whole chunk of the morning's work gone in seconds. The fallen woman mutters into her scarf, frustration mixing with cold. Then, with a resigned grunt, she stands, picks up her bucket and turns back toward the spring. Because what else can she do? The woman you follow watches all this with quiet empathy, then continues forward. Not with fear, not with panic, Just the grim, steady determination of someone who has weathered every season, every storm, every setback, and will weather this one too. She tightens her grip, leans into the wind, and walks on. Because winter doesn't care how tired she is. Summer doesn't care how thirsty she is. Rain doesn't care how slippery the world becomes. But her household cares, and that's enough. By the time she returns to the cottage again, her steps are slower, heavier, and more deliberate. Not because she lacks strength. She has more functional strength than most modern gym-goers could dream of, but because she must now face the part of the routine that tests more than muscle. It tests balance. It tests focus. It tests awareness of terrain so instinctive that she could walk this path blindfolded and still avoid every rut, stone, and patch of treacherous ground. Because if there's one thing medieval water-carrying never forgives, it's bad footing. You follow her back toward the spring for the next haul, and the path looks different now, less like a simple route and more like a gauntlet of hazards hidden in plain sight. With every step you understand more clearly that water carrying wasn't just physically demanding. It was an obstacle course that shifted with the seasons, the weather, the livestock, the landscape, and even the mood of the ground beneath her feet. A sudden dip, disaster. A loose stone, disaster. A root poking up from the earth like a medieval booby trap, double disaster. You walk behind her as she lifts her skirt slightly to avoid a stretch of sticky mud so deep it could probably swallow a chicken hole. To your modern eyes, the path looks rustic. To hers, it's a living map of danger and routine, one she's memorized so completely that her feet move in patterns she doesn't even consciously think about anymore. The terrain here changes fast, too fast. A section that was dry this morning is now slick with meltwater. A patch of frost has formed in the shaded dip beneath a tree. Someone's goat, a creature with the moral compass of a pickpocket, has scraped up dirt claw marks, creating uneven divots in the ground. You realise immediately that slipping isn't just embarrassing, it's costly. Every spill means another mile, another half hour, another toll on joints already pushed to their limit. Ahead of her, another woman adjusts her yoke, shifting her buckets so they don't swing too widely when the path narrows. It's a dance, one that must be performed perfectly. One misstep and the yoke twists, sending a bucket smacking into her leg with bruising force. The woman sighs, steadies it, and continues. This is medieval terrain management. A wooden footbridge appears at the next bend. Not a picturesque fairy tale bridge, but a narrow plank of wood laid across a shallow ditch. It's worn smooth by decades of feet. Cold makes it slick. Rain makes it treacherous. Snow makes it nearly impossible. The woman you follow slows her pace and places each foot carefully, her buckets tilting slightly but never spilling. Behind her, a girl hesitates, arms trembling under the weight, then takes a breath and follows, her mother watching closely from behind. You start to see the pattern. Every generation here learns the path intimately. Mothers teach daughters where to place feet, how to shift weight, how to angle buckets, how to use hips and elbows to stabilize the load. No one is born with this knowledge. It's inherited through observation, through repetition, through necessity. As you reach a sharper incline, the woman leans forward, balancing the weight so the buckets don't swing backward and smack her knees. This incline is no joke. Dirt has been worn away into a series of uneven steps carved by feet and hoof prints, where rocks jut up unpredictably. You spot one ankle-twisting stone half buried in the mud and understand how easily a single misstep could derail an entire day, and it's not just the ground. The world around her provides its own set of hazards, each one a threat to her balance, her buckets, her schedule. Dogs dart unpredictably across the path. Geese guard their territory like feathered demons. Strangers occasionally travel the road, traders, labourers, the rare noble's servant, and these unfamiliar presences always make women more alert. Because out here, miles from the village centre, safety is not guaranteed. A rustle in the brush makes her glance sideways. Not fear exactly, just awareness. People carried water not in isolated domestic bubbles, but through open land where anything could happen. A boar could charge, a fox could dart out, A stranger could appear. Medieval women were not naive. They walked with their senses on high alert. She steps around a bramble patch, careful not to snag the hem of her skirt. Even clothing becomes a hazard on this terrain. A caught hem could mean a stumble, and a stumble could mean spilled water, twisted ankles, broken vessels, and hours lost. The most treacherous parts of the path, though, are the sections that look harmless. A flat stretch of dirt is deceptively safe until you realise it's been churned to slippery clay by livestock. A cluster of leaves hides a shallow puddle ready to splash mud onto your bucket rims. A smooth patch of frost masquerades as dry earth until your foot touches it and suddenly thinks it's auditioning for a skating show. The woman adjusts again. That tiny tilt of the wrist, that micro shift of her elbow. It's all part of her learned survival. You watch her breathing, slow and controlled. Not because she's calm, but because maintaining rhythm keeps spills at bay. Breath too fast. Your shoulders shake. Your steps wobble. Water sloshes. The whole system collapses. She moves past a narrow section where the path hugs a low wall. The wall is made of uneven stones, some jutting out like sharp elbows. If her bucket hits one, the shock could send water flying. So she hugs the opposite side, boots brushing the tall dead grasses. Even the sound her buckets make matters. Experienced women can hear trouble before they see it. A deeper slosh means the water level is uneven. She'll shift the bucket. A hollow knock means it hit something. She'll adjust her path. A sudden quiet means water is dangerously close to spilling. She slows immediately. The forest edge rises ahead, creating pockets of shade where frost lingers stubbornly. The woman steps over exposed tree roots as gracefully as someone who's been doing it for decades. But behind her, another woman stumbles slightly. Her bucket rocks violently, a wave of water slapping against the rim. She steadies it, cheeks flushing, the whole group pretending not to notice out of respect. It's not competition here, it's community. Still, everyone knows that one good spill could put them an hour behind. As the woman reaches the spring again, she sets the buckets down with a small exhale, flexes her fingers and scans the area reflexively. Not for danger, not for beauty, but for terrain. Which spot is safest? Which angle is stable? Where has someone splashed water on the bank, creating mud? Where did leaves fall overnight? Terrain shapes every trip. It shapes her pace, her stride, her posture, her energy, her risk, her entire schedule. Because no matter the weather, the season, or the demands of the day, she must cross this path again, and again, and again. Every rut memorized, every stone catalogued, every danger anticipated. She dips the bucket, lifts it again, and turns toward the path home. Only now you see the truth. She isn't just walking a trail. She's navigating a landscape designed to test her at every step. And she does it with the steady, practiced grace of someone whose survival depends on getting it right. By the time she makes it back to the cottage again, emptying the buckets with the precision of someone measuring each pour like currency, you start to grasp something deeper, something that explains why this ritual ruled medieval life so completely. It isn't just the weight. It isn't just the terrain. It isn't just the weather. It's the clock behind all of it. Because medieval time isn't your time. There are no alarms, no timers, no synced schedules, no hour-by-hour planners. There is only daylight, firelight, and the absolute tyranny of tasks that must happen in a specific order. And water, always water, sits at the foundation of every chain of chores that follows. She sets the last bucket down and blows out a slow breath, the kind that comes from knowing the morning is already half gone. Inside the cottage, the fire crackles weakly. The porridge pot waits to be filled. Yesterday's bowls sit in a stack, needing to be rinsed before they can be used. The baby is fussing in the corner. The animals need tending. The house needs sweeping. The bread dough must be started before noon. Every one of these tasks demands water, and every water-dependent chore demands time. You follow her as she moves through the cottage, dividing her limited supply into mentally assigned portions. Half a bucket for cooking, a quarter for washing hands and tools, a small ladleful to warm near the fire for the toddler. It looks like she's barely doing anything, but in reality she's performing one of the most demanding mental gymnastics routines of medieval domestic life, balancing the water budget. Because not only does she need to use water wisely, she needs to use time wisely too. Every medieval woman lived by invisible scheduling rules. You can't cook without water, but you can't prepare the water until you fetch it. And you can't fetch it if the sun is too low. And you can't heat it if the fire burns too low. And you can't start the bread if the water isn't warm. And you can't feed the animals if the trough is empty. And you can't clean the tools without washing them. And you can't wash the tools unless you fetch more water. Everything is chained. Everything is layered. Everything depends on what she does now. This is why medieval water hauling wasn't a chore. It was the spine of the entire household schedule. As she wipes her hands and steps outside again, buckets in hand, you notice how she doesn't rush. Rushing wastes energy. Wasting energy wastes time. Time is the real currency here. Rare, fragile, constantly slipping away. She falls in with a few neighbours heading toward the spring again. This time they're talking. Not gossip, not storytelling, but logistics. One woman mentions she'll need extra water later to brew ale. Another has guests arriving, meaning more cooking. Another complains her youngest spilled half a jug on the hearth. Each statement is a confession of time debt. Every dropped bucket, every spilt pot, every miscalculation means another hour added to an already crowded day. Modern life has 1,000 distractions. Medieval life had one: survival. As you reach the ridge overlooking the spring, you see the sun climbing higher now, the light shifting into the pale gold that marks late morning. This is the busiest time of the water path, when everyone tries to fit in their last large haul before the day tilts into its afternoon obligations. Once the sun begins its downward arc, everything becomes a race against dusk. A medieval day is short. A medieval woman's day is shorter still. She takes her place in line, dips her buckets, lifts them, and begins the return. But watch her closely now. Something important has changed. Her pace is slightly quicker, her jaw slightly tenser, her steps a bit more clipped. Not rushed, just aware. Because by this point in the day, the mental clock inside her head is ticking louder. The midday meal must be started soon. Bread must be kneaded. Tools must be rinsed. Wool must be soaked. Animals must be watered again. The infant needs washing. A neighbour might stop by needing help. Someone might appear with news or a request. And the fire must be kept alive through all of it. You walk with her, hearing the soft grunt each time she adjusts her grip. The buckets are full. The sun is climbing. And every step carries the pressure of tasks waiting at home. The truth becomes crystal clear. Her entire day is structured around when she can fetch water and how much she can carry each time. If she misjudges a single trip, the schedule collapses. If she spills even a quart, she might lose an hour. If she delays too long, daylight will run out. It's a strange kind of timekeeping, more instinctive than mathematical, more physical, the chronological. Medieval women weren't tracking minutes. They were tracking tasks, and each task had a natural rhythm set by the demands of the household, the demands of the land, and the limitations of the human body. A modern person might glance at a clock. A medieval woman glanced at a waterline inside a bucket. She reaches the cottage again and pours some into the pot over the fire. The sound of the water hitting hot iron fills the room with a hiss, and steam curls upward like a small ghost. She wipes her brow, already calculating. She can fit one more trip before noon, maybe two if she's fast, definitely one if the toddler doesn't cry, possibly zero if her husband returns early from the fields needing water for tools. The schedule isn't fixed, it shifts constantly, shaped by need, shaped by circumstance, shaped by others who depend on her labour without ever fully seeing it. You realise then, her life is a cycle within a cycle. Water governs the chores govern the hours, and the hours govern her energy, which in turn governs how many more buckets she can carry before nightfall. The clock is her body. The clock is the path. The clock is the distance between her home and the source. The clock is the weather, the seasons, the needs of everyone around her. Time, for her, is not measured, it is carried, bucket by bucket, step by step, trip by trip, until the sun dips low and the cold rushes back in, until her arms tremble and her back aches, until every container in the house is filled just enough to survive the night. She hangs the empty buckets on the wall peg, breathes out slowly, wipes her hands and glances toward the spring again. There is still more to do. There is always more to do. When she steps outside again, you immediately sense the shift, not in the weather, not in the terrain, but in the social atmosphere. The path to the spring is no longer the solitary rhythm of dawn. It is now a living corridor of voices, footsteps, personalities, and quiet negotiations. Because while water fetching was a deeply individual burden, it was also, inevitably, unavoidably, a social event. Not the fun kind, not the girls' day out kind, the medieval kind, where cooperation, tension, etiquette, conflict, humour, and hierarchy all swirl together like sediment at the bottom of a bucket. As she walks toward the spring, she falls into step beside a neighbour, Agnes, a sharp-eyed woman with arms like braided rope, and a laugh loud enough to scare chickens. Agnes greets her warmly, but wastes no time sharing the morning news. The lower path is a mud pit again, and the carter boy dropped his bucket twice, another woman adds, and the goose bit him. Ah, your woman murmurs, again. These exchanges seem small, but each comment is actually incredibly important. The path changes constantly. Sharing updates about hazards is a survival tactic. If someone twisted an ankle, everyone needs to know. If the stream is cloudy, everyone needs to know. If a fox has been spotted nearby, everyone needs to know. In a world without instant messaging, the water path is the group chat. But of course, where you gather people, you also gather tension. As the group reaches the spring, you immediately notice the line. It isn't formal. No ropes, no waiting numbers. It's based on familiarity, habit, unspoken rules, and the very delicate balance of medieval politeness. People know who arrived first. People know who's next. People know who's trying to sneak ahead. And people definitely notice when someone breaks the rules. A woman from the far end of the village, Joan, who is known for her flexible interpretation of social order, edges slightly closer to the water than her turn allows. 3 other women narrow their eyes in perfect synchronization. Joan pretends not to notice. Agnes notices. "Oh, look," Agnes calls in a voice that could wake the dead. "A miracle! The line has rearranged itself without consulting anyone." Joan freezes. Several women snort into their shawls. Your woman hides a smile. This is medieval conflict resolution. Loud commentary, pointed humour and communal shaming strong enough to push a fully grown ox backward. Joan steps back into her proper place without further argument. The spring becomes a busy hub, like a tiny marketplace with no goods except water and opinions. Women fill buckets, exchange stories, ask for help lifting heavy loads, complain about husbands who lost boots again, discuss the weather, share news from travellers, and make plans for upcoming feast days. There is gossip, of course. Gossip that flows more freely than the spring on a rainy day. Did you hear Eleanor's daughter might be betrothed? No. To who? The miller's apprentice. Oh, shame. Terrible shame. Could be worse. Everyone hums in vague agreement. But beneath the chatter lies something deeper. Community cohesion. This daily gathering binds the women together. They share information. They share labour. They share frustrations. They borrow tools. They warn each other about illness. They notice when someone is missing, and that alone can save lives. If a woman doesn't appear at the spring, people talk. They wonder. They check on her. In a world without doctors readily available, women were each other's best chance at early detection of trouble. Relationships built here shape the entire social fabric of the village. But cooperation has its limits. Water scarcity turns friendliness into tension fast. When drought hits, the spring shrinks. When rain floods the banks, the water muddies. When livestock upstream disturb the source, tempers flare. When someone uses more than their share, murmurs ripple through the group like a storm beginning its spin. Today the water runs clean, and the mood is relatively light. But even now, every woman is watching. The water level, monitoring the clarity, estimating whether the supply will hold steady through the afternoon. Your woman finally kneels at the edge to dip her bucket. She waits her turn without complaint, lifting each filled bucket as though she's done this 1,000 times, which she has. She steps aside so another can take her place. It's quiet, efficient, respectful. These women understand something modern people sometimes forget. Communal resources require communal discipline. As she rests for a moment before the walk back, she overhears an argument breaking out on the far side. A teenage girl with a cracked bucket stands beside an older woman who is, very clearly, unhappy. The girl borrowed the bucket and returned it damaged. Voices rise. "I told you not to fill it so fast. It wasn't my fault, the stones shifted. That bucket took 3 months to pay for. You're always blaming me." If you can't carry properly, don't ask for my things. The tension builds until Agnes steps in. Because of course Agnes steps in. "Enough," she says, grabbing both women by the elbows. "The spring is loud enough today without your shrieking echoing off it." And that's that. A few muttered apologies. A few deep breaths. Cooperation restored. Medieval conflict resolution. Part referee, part diplomat, part schoolteacher. Your woman lifts her buckets again and begins the trek back. As you walk behind her, you notice the social structure extending far beyond the spring. Along the path, women line up in informal clusters, friends, relatives, mothers with daughters, pairs who live near each other. They naturally fall into groups based on pace. Some move quickly, eager to get back home. Others walk slower, talking quietly about worries, hopes, or the aches of motherhood. People offer help where needed, steadying a bucket, warning about a slippery patch, carrying a toddler while a mother manages her load. In a world where every household is constantly on the brink of overwork, cooperation isn't optional, it's essential. But cooperation has an opposite twin: competition. Whose house is cleanest? Whose husband works hardest? Whose daughter carries water with the least spilling? Whose bucket is newest? Whose spring access is closest? Even tiny things, like who arrives at the spring earliest, carry social meaning. Your woman doesn't seem to care about that. She carries her load with calm, steady focus, neither flaunting her skill nor apologizing for it. But others on the path absolutely measure one another. "This morning I carried 2 full jugs before dawn." "Oh, I've already made 3 trips." "That's nothing. I once made 5 before breakfast and I was pregnant." Medieval mums invented competitive suffering centuries before the internet. Still, beneath the bragging, beneath the gossip, beneath the occasional snap of irritation, there's something unexpectedly beautiful: solidarity. If one woman falls, 3 rush to help. If someone's bucket cracks, another offers a spare. If a child runs crying, someone picks them up without hesitation. If water looks odd, the group investigates together. This path is not just a route to water. It is the beating social heart of the village. It is where news spreads, friendships deepen, disputes flare, alliances form, marriages are predicted, and rumours are born. It's where women, whose labour is everywhere and nowhere in medieval history books, become visible to each other. And as your woman reaches the final bend home, buckets swaying gently, you understand. Water didn't just bind the household, it bound the community, in cooperation, in conflict, in laughter, in quiet, in survival. Every drop carried here flowed through the veins of the social world just as much as the physical one. By the time she reaches her cottage again, the weight of the buckets has carved a faint tremble into her elbows and wrists. She sets them down carefully, always carefully, and exhales in a slow, measured way that tells you she's learned exactly how to release tension without wasting energy. She pours some of the water into the large iron pot over the fire, adds a ladleful to a wooden bowl, tips a little into the animal trough outside, then splashes a thin film over her hands to rinse off dirt and frozen grit. And as she wipes them dry on her apron, that's when you notice it. The stiffness in her fingers, the swelling around her knuckles, the way she rotates her shoulder with a tiny wince before picking up the empty buckets again. This is the part people forget. This is the part historians often gloss over. This is the part medieval artwork doesn't show. The toll. Every step she's taken today, every step she will take tomorrow, every step she's taken for the past decade, is etched into her muscles, her bones, her skin, her breath. Water carrying doesn't just tire a medieval woman, it shapes her, quite literally. As she steps outside again, buckets swinging lightly in her grip, her gait tells the story, a slight forward lean, a set to her shoulders that speaks of habitual strain, a rhythm in her steps that compensates for joints that have borne too much weight too many times. Medieval women didn't walk upright like floating saints in illuminated manuscripts. They walked like weight-bearers, because they were, every single day. You follow her to the path once more, and she pauses at the first bend to stretch her back, quickly, discreetly, as if unwilling to waste even a heartbeat of the precious daylight she needs. Her lower back is already tight. Her legs are thick with muscle. Her forearms are strong in a functional way that makes modern arm workouts look like hobbies. But strength doesn't cancel injury. It masks it, until it doesn't. Health impacts of daily water carrying were not dramatic catastrophes. They were slow, cumulative, grinding. The kind of discomfort that doesn't send you to bed. It just becomes part of your existence. You start to notice the details. Her fingers, swollen at the joints from gripping cold handles year-round, stiff in winter, calloused in spots where wood bit into skin. Her wrists, subtly twisted inward from years of balancing uneven loads that fought against her with every slosh. Her shoulders, overdeveloped in ways that medieval clothing hides but posture reveals, the kind of strength earned through necessity, not choice. Her spine, a slight curvature that comes from leaning forward thousands upon thousands of times to offset the pull of full buckets. Her knees, always bent slightly, always bracing, always absorbing impact from slippery paths and sudden jolts. Her body is a map of the labour she performs, and she is far from unique. Ahead of her, another woman, the midwife's sister, walks with a limp so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't looking closely. That limp has a story. She slipped on an icy ridge carrying water 2 winters ago, twisted her ankle, didn't rest enough afterward, because resting wasn't an option. Now she walks differently. Forever. Another woman pauses to rub her lower back. A child clings to her skirt. Her breath is tight. Her hands shake faintly. You can tell she's been carrying water since before sunrise. Maybe she's pregnant, maybe she's simply exhausted, maybe both. Medieval women were not delicate, they were not fragile, they were not weak. They were tough in ways that don't make it into heroic tales precisely because their strength was ordinary, expected, invisible. But invisible strength still has a price. You walk beside your woman as the wind picks up again, and she instinctively shields her hands inside her sleeves. Cold is her enemy today. Cold stiffens joints. Cold numbs fingers. Cold makes the handles more painful to grip. Cold steals energy faster than hunger, and hunger is always nearby. A medieval woman did not eat to fuel herself. She ate to stay functional. She ate last, after children and husband. She ate whatever was left. A body that works this hard on limited fuel suffers long-term consequences. Chronic fatigue, joint pain, early arthritis, shorter stature, weakened immunity. You watch as she adjusts her grip on the bucket, shifting the wooden handle from one indentation in her palm to another. Her hands look much older than her face. Her fingers are thick, sturdy, slightly misshapen from years of pressure. The nails are short, worn, uneven. And the weather, the terrain, the daily repetition only amplify the strain. But the greatest toll of all is this. There is no recovery time. Modern bodies rest between workouts. Modern joints recover from strain. Modern muscles get breaks. Medieval women didn't. Every day required the same labour. Every season demanded the same endurance. Every morning asked her hands, "Can you grip the handles again?" And every morning they answered, "We have to." She reaches the spring, bends her knees slowly, carefully, and lowers the bucket. You can tell the bending hurts her a little. She doesn't groan. Medieval women rarely vocalize pain. Pain is part of life. Pain is expected. Pain is normal. She scoops the water, fills the bucket, lifts it with a grunt so soft it's almost swallowed by the wind. Around her, every woman is carrying her own private archive of aches. The woman with the limp, the woman with the stiff fingers, the teenager with swollen wrists from growing too fast and carrying too early. The elderly woman who no longer fetches water but still rubs her hands constantly, remembering the ache that used to define her mornings. These are generational injuries, passed down not through blood but through labour, through repetition, through hundreds of thousands of steps. As she begins her walk home, buckets heavy and fingers cold, you notice her breathing shift. She's pacing herself, not just for this trip but for the next one and the next and the one after that. Because fatigue compounds. One difficult morning leads to an even harder afternoon. A harsh winter leads to a rough spring. A summer drought leads to dangerous dehydration. Years of strain lead to bodies aging faster. Medieval women often looked older than their age, not because of some vague, old-timey hardship, but because daily water carrying aged them visibly, physically, relentlessly. But here is the quiet miracle of the moment. Despite everything, the pain, the cold, the weight, the stiffness, the endless repetition, the toll carved into muscle and bone, she keeps walking, not because she enjoys it, not because she chose it, but because someone has to. The household depends on her, the routine depends on her, the path depends on her, life depends on her, and she, aching, resilient, steady, rises to meet that demand every single day without hesitation. You watch the set of her shoulders as she disappears around the bend, bucket swinging, breath steady, posture determined. Her body carries the scars of labour. Her spirit carries the weight of survival. She returns from the spring once again, breath steady, shoulders squared, buckets biting anew into the grooves carved long ago into her palms. She pours the water into the waiting jugs and pots, wipes her hands on her apron, and stands still for just a moment, long enough for you to see something flicker in her face. Not exhaustion, not pain, recognition. A quiet, daily acknowledgement of the truth every medieval woman lived with. There should be something, anything, easier than this by now. Because here's the thing, medieval life constantly dangled in front of people the promise of better. The idea that technology, rudimentary, fragile, temperamental technology, could lighten the burden, could spare the back, could save the hours, could break the cycle. And yet, almost nothing changed. Not for centuries. As she steps outside again with her buckets, you feel that weight. Not the water, but the weight of history pressing down. Because medieval Europe knew about aqueducts, it knew about siphons, it knew about pumps, it knew about piping systems made of clay or wood or lead. The ancients had invented them, engineers understood them, monasteries used them, castles had them, even some towns had small, intricate systems feeding central fountains. So why didn't villagers adopt them? Why did she still carry water, mile after mile, year after year? The answer, of course, is everything and nothing. Cost, labour, materials, knowledge, politics, maintenance, class divisions, fear of risk, lack of incentive. And the one silent truth medieval people rarely said aloud: if the burden falls on women, the system has no reason to change. You follow her down the familiar path as she joins a cluster of women walking toward the spring yet again. Their chatter turns, inevitably, to the topic that bubbles up whenever exhaustion edges too close to frustration. Wouldn't it be nice if the well actually worked properly? My husband says we should dig it deeper. Your husband has said that for 6 years, so he's thinking about it. That's not the same as doing it. True enough. Laughter follows. Exasperated, affectionate, resigned. Because everyone here has heard the stories. The monks at the abbey 3 miles away have a pipe running from their spring into the cloister. A nearby manor house has a cistern system with stone-filtered runoff. A neighbouring town has a mechanical pump imported by a merchant who married well. Villages see glimpses of technology the way people today see glimpses of luxury lifestyles online. Just close enough to imagine, just far enough to be unattainable. Your woman adjusts her grip on the bucket handles, and you can sense her thinking, why not here? Why not us? Why not now? The answers, unfortunately, pile up like stones in a field. Cost a simple wooden pump could cost more than most families earned in months. A stone-lined cistern? Entirely out of reach. A pipe system? Impossible without coordinated labour and materials the village didn't possess. Knowledge. The blacksmith could repair metal parts, but not design a system. The carpenter could shape wood, but not calculate pressure. The villagers had skill, but not the right skill. Maintenance. Even if they built something, who would maintain it? Who had time to dig trenches, replace pipes, patch leaks, or resolve blockages that could freeze or rot or collapse? Land ownership. The Lord might forbid construction. The church might claim rights over springs. Water was a resource tied to feudal power, not community freedom. Fear of failure. If a pump broke, if a pipe cracked, if a cistern collapsed, it wasn't just inconvenient, it threatened survival. People trusted what they could rely on, their own bodies. As she reaches the spring, you imagine all the hypothetical inventions medieval engineers designed on parchments, ideas that rarely left the workshop, ideas that priests condemned as unnatural, ideas that villagers feared because the unknown was dangerous in a world with no safety net. She dips her bucket. The water is clean today, but you can almost hear the collective sigh of centuries behind her. Women who dreamed of a device, a miracle, a trick that would shorten this path forever. Some villages did try. Attempt number 1, dugouts and trenches. Shallow trenches meant to guide water closer to homes. They clogged with mud, flooded, grew algae, became mosquito havens, failed. Attempt number 2, wooden pipes made from hollowed out logs, cheap, clever, promising. Then they burst in winter, warped in summer, or split from internal pressure. Failed. Attempt number 3. Hand pumps, technically advanced. Required iron parts, required maintenance, required money. Worked briefly, then failed. Attempt 4. Cisterns caught rainwater. Brilliant idea. Until drought hit. Or until someone forgot to cover it. Or until a rat drowned in it. Failed. Attempt thus 5. Wheel-driven contraptions. Overshot wheels. Chain of pot devices. Clever. Marvellous. Temperamental. Perfect in theory. In practice, too fragile. Too costly. Too risky. Failed. The list goes on. Every attempt chipped at the edges of the problem but never solved it. Not because people were stupid, but because the system was stacked against innovation where it was needed most. And then there was the quiet, invisible obstacle at the heart of it all. Men controlled village engineering. Women carried water. Men felt no urgency to improve something they didn't have to do. It's not malicious. It's structural. But the result is the same. Your woman lifts her full buckets now, the weight pulling her shoulders down once more. She steps carefully away from the spring, nodding at a few neighbours as she passes. Her arms tremble faintly, the cold amplifying the strain. And yet, she's resigned. Not defeated, not hopeless, just realistic. She does not expect anyone to invent a machine to save her. She does not expect the Lord to build a pipe. She does not expect a miracle. She expects only the weight of the buckets, the shape of the path, and the rhythm of her own footsteps. That is the technological limit of her world. But it isn't just technological. It's cultural. It's generational. It's baked into the very bones of village life. She knows, just as her mother knew, and her grandmother knew, that the simplest innovation would change everything. But she also knows that every attempt so far has failed. Something always breaks. Something always shifts. Something always rots, freezes, collapses, or goes wrong. And so she accepts the familiar solution, the reliable one, the one that never fails, as long as her body continues to function. She carries the water. Because in this world, human muscle is the only technology that never goes out of fashion. As she crests the final rise toward the village once more, bucket steady, breath visible in the cold air, you feel the truth settle over you like a heavy cloak. Medieval women didn't lack technology. Technology failed them, again and again. Until eventually generations stopped hoping for improvements and leaned into the one system that always worked, their own endurance. By the time she makes it back to the cottage yet again, a soft dullness has settled into the sky, the kind that warns evening will come earlier than expected, that the last stretch of daylight will slip through her fingers if she isn't careful. She sets the water down with a familiar motion, the kind that feels almost instinctive now. Her hands linger on the bucket rims, perhaps measuring how much is left, perhaps just giving herself a heartbeat of stillness. Because soon the day will turn, soon the light will fade, soon the path will darken. And in this fragile sliver between late afternoon and dusk, you begin to feel the weight of something larger than her footsteps, something older than her village, older than her family, older than the cottage walls around her. This routine is ancient, older than her mother, older than her grandmother, older than the medieval world itself. Carrying water is a tradition so deeply rooted in human history that it becomes almost invisible. And yet, it is there, woven through every culture, every economy, every household that ever existed before plumbing reshaped the world. As she steps outside again with her buckets, lighter this time, because evening chores demand less water, you understand that what you are watching is not merely a task. You're watching a lineage, a long, unbroken inheritance of labour passed from woman to woman, century to century, across continents and civilizations. The path she walks is specific to her village, but her journey is universal. Her steps echo the steps of Roman women climbing hills from communal fountains. Her hands mirror those of Egyptian women filling clay jars at the Nile. Her posture matches Greek women balancing amphorae on their heads. Her rhythm resembles the footsteps of countless women across Africa, Asia, and the Americas who carried water long before medieval Europe even existed. The technology changed slowly, fitfully, unevenly, but the duty endured. Why? Because every society built itself around access to water, and every society, almost without exception, tasked women with fetching it, not because they were weaker, not because they were suited to it, but because domestic labour anchored the entire structure of life, and water was the first link in that chain. She walks now with something softer in her step. Not ease, not relief, but familiarity. The path feels gentler near evening, the wind less biting, the slope less sharp. Maybe it's the light, filtering through the trees like warm gold dust. Maybe it's the knowledge that after this trip she will turn to indoor tasks, the ones illuminated by firelight, the ones defined by warmth instead of wind. Behind her, other women walk as well, some nearly finished for the day, some just beginning last-minute tasks, some talking in low, steady tones about meals, illness, children, animals, small village dramas. Their silhouettes stretch long across the ground, dark against the glow of the sinking sun. She dips her bucket one final time. Her fingers move slowly, not from fatigue but from a gentler awareness of the moment. The water ripples, catching the last light of the afternoon, glimmering like polished silver. As she rises, the air feels calmer. The world seems to exhale, and the path home becomes something quieter than it has been all day. She steps lightly over the familiar obstacles, roots, stones, dips in the earth, her feet knowing exactly where to land. Her breaths are long and steady. Even the buckets seem less restless, swaying with a peaceful rhythm instead of fighting her with every step. And this is where something subtle blooms in the air. Acceptance, not defeat, not resignation, acceptance. Because this routine is not just labour, it is structure, it is predictability, it is identity, it is connection to the land, to the community, to the countless women who walked before her. The path is difficult, but it is also hers, and as you walk behind her, the daylight thinning into soft twilight, the entire world seems to soften with her pace. Her cottage lamp glows faintly ahead, a warm orange flicker calling her home. Smoke curls upward from the hearth, a promise of heat after a day of cold. The air smells of wood, wool, and something simmering in the pot. She enters the cottage, pours the last of the day's water into various containers, and wipes down the rims with slow, practiced care. Evening settles into the walls like a sigh. The chores will continue, cooking, tending, preparing tomorrow's tasks. But the rhythm is slower now, softer. The frantic pressure of the morning has dissolved into a gentler cadence. Inside, the fire crackles. Outside, the wind lowers to a whisper. The buckets rest beside the door. The path grows dim, and as she sits briefly beside the hearth, rubbing warmth back into her hands, the entire world quiets. This is the wind down. This is the hush that comes after the weight has been lifted. This is the moment when the day releases its grip. Her eyelids lower, her shoulders loosen. The fire glows. The water rests, and the path outside fades into darkness. Tomorrow she will walk it again. Tomorrow she will lift the buckets again. Tomorrow she will follow the same ancient rhythm. But for now, in this soft flickering quiet, the world grows gentle around her, and you, watching from the doorway of history, feel yourself slowing too. Your breaths deepen, your shoulders release. The firelight softens the edges of the room. The steady hum of her day settles into stillness, and the long, long path she walked begins to fade into the calm of evening. Let it fade. Let the last light dim. Let the warmth rise. Let your own eyes grow heavy, because the day is done. The water is carried, the path is silent, and the night has finally arrived to rest her, and you, beneath its quiet, steady comfort.